Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College in Ashland, Virginia. Today is April 24th, 2019, and I am here with Provost and Professor of Physics, William T. Franz. So, Bill, can you tell us briefly where you're from and about your educational background?
Sure. I grew up in the Philadelphia area. Went to Upper Dublin High School. Was an undergraduate at Muhlenberg College in Pennsylvania. I had intended to be a math major. Got to school. What I'd always loved to do was solve problems with numbers. Realized the mathematicians were into things like proving theorems, and that the people over in physics were doing the fun stuff like solving problems with numbers. So I turned to physics, finished both a physics and a math major. Really liked the faculty that I experienced there. Saw what they were doing as something that might be an enjoyable way to move ahead. So they talked me into going to graduate school. I went to graduate school at University of Delaware and moved from there after I finished the dissertation to 2 years in Central Illinois at Eastern Illinois University, where my wife and I discovered we were not Midwesterners. We were coastal people and were looking to get back. I was at a large state institution, and that wasn't quite my style. Wasn't what I had grown up with as an undergraduate, and started to look for places back on the East Coast that had the kind of educational style that I liked.
Mm-hmm. The kind that you had experienced yourself.
Exactly,
right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So you came to Randolph-Macon in 1983.
Yes.
And tell us about who hired you and who was in the department at that time.
Sure. There were three of us. Bill Hesse was the department chair. Emmett Madry had been there, I think, just 1 year more than I had. There had been a visitor, Tom Chiba, and when I came to interview, I got picked up at the airport by Tom Chiba, who was wearing a tuxedo because he had come from the President's Ball. It was Valentine's Day weekend, and in those days, President Payne had a winter ball, and everybody dressed to the nines and went to a dance in Crenshaw Gym. So I got picked up by a person in a tuxedo from my interview.
Oh, did that give you a little pause? Like, oh man, they're kind of fancy.
That gave me a little pause. The amount of snow on the ground gave me a little pause. And what probably gave me the most pause was Sunday afternoon when Bill drove me around Richmond and Ashland in one of the college's old pool cars. And smack in front of the Ashland Theater, we ran out of gas.
Oh, no.
With about a foot of snow on the ground. And in those days, you could check out a college car for almost any reason, even for personal reasons. Oh. But if you put any gas in it, it got charged to your department budget. And Bill was cheap. And he was not about to put any more gas in there than possible. And everyone's goal was to return the car to the motor pool with no gas in it. And we came really close to being able to do that, but he ran out of gas right in front of the theater and had to hike down the road and to the nearest gas station and put some gas in the car.
But it didn't. That didn't scare you off too much.
No, I came anyway.
That's right.
There's a sense sometimes that you're needed somewhere, and maybe I was needed.
Oh, goodness. Okay, well, so you moved to, did you move directly to live in Ashland when you moved here?
We lived 1 year on Staples Mill Road in an apartment, trying to figure out where we'd want to land. Mm-hmm. We didn't have a lot of money. And then Bill was to go on sabbatical in Germany, and he invited us to house sit for him for a year. Mm. So Patty and I and our now newborn moved to 123 Mullen Drive to Bill Hesse's house in June. And unfortunately, what happened next is that in August, he was killed in a car accident in Germany while he was on leave. and we were about to be homeless. So we moved 3 houses down the road to 117 Mullen Drive. Worst move of my life, because when you're moving 500 feet, you don't think you need to pack, but you do. And we lived there until we bought our house over on Sneed Street, where we've been forever.
Great. Well, I don't want to go too long, but I would like for you to talk about how the college responded after Bill Hess's death.
That was a really devastating time for some folks. Bill was very much loved, very much respected. He was a sort of larger-than-life person. There's lots of legend about him, as I'm sure you're aware. And because it happened in the summer, and because he was away, it was very difficult. There was no family to comfort. All the kinds of things we do at the passing of a person weren't available to be done. So it was a tough time to get through, I think. Certainly for us in the physics department, because it left just 2 of us very junior people without our chair, and trying to figure out how we were going to proceed from there.
And how did one of you become chair at that time?
We started a search. The search was for either an assistant professor or a chair. The folks who came in as candidates who would have been chair weren't real good. And along the way, Emmett moved on to the naval facility at Dahlgren. And so I became chair after, I guess it was my 3rd or 4th year here. So I was a pretty young department chair.
Well, it just goes back to what you said earlier. The college needed you. So you were right.
That's right, yeah.
Well, the Copley Science Center was pretty new when you came. So do you want to talk about your early years teaching and the building and the courses or things like that?
We were pretty much a family over in Copley. Mary Edwards Kitterman had the office next to mine. Mary was the education department. So early on, I learned about other departments. Bill famously said, if you want to have more than 2 friends, you better have friends outside the department. And that has certainly held true for the entirety of my career. This is a place where your friendships often are outside of your department. And finding friends in the computer science department, in math, in chemistry, biology, was an easy thing to do. Copley is full to overflowing, even after we've built a new building, but it was pretty empty then. Only about 1/3 of the offices, I think, were actually occupied by faculty.
Wow. Well, that's good that they built for growth. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. But before we move on to your work as an administrator, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your role as a teacher. Any experiences with students? And I understand there was one special course after Hurricane Katrina. That was significant.
So my first real student, I guess they would say, was Sanjay Tandon, who's now on the Board of Trustees. Sanjay was to be a graduating senior. He wanted to take a course in nuclear physics. It fell to me to teach the course. I'd never really had such a course, so I was about 1 chapter ahead of him. I never let him know that. But together we went through a reading course and forged a friendship that I think still exists to this day. I still enjoy talking to Sanjay when he comes back for board meetings and the like. And we were always a small department, so we had really good relationships with our majors. We're able to keep track of them after graduation, forge really tight bonds.
Well, that is the hallmark of Randolph-Macon and schools like it, is that faculty-student relationship. That's great. Did you want to talk about going to help out Katrina?
Sure. This happened after the storm, and I had never been to New Orleans before the storm. I had no idea what that was like. I remember my son calling me up just before the storm, and he said, New Orleans is going to disappear, and I've never been there. And I said, well, I've never been there either. And I can't imagine an American city disappearing, but it came real close. After the storm, I talked with Ira Andrews. Ira was a friend, dean of students, and Reber Dunkel, who taught for us in sociology at the time, and we decided we wanted to have a course. So we went to Dean Hoyer, who graciously agreed that we could take students. We rented a bus. We had 28 students who signed up, who paid not a whole lot of money because we didn't have hotels and things. We had to pay for the bus, and we slept in Sunday school rooms at a Methodist church across the river on little mats at the ends of our day. But they paid. We spent 2 weeks in the city mucking out houses. We spent a week beforehand on campus looking at things. Ira, whose background was religious studies, taught a section on why it is that people of faith respond to others in times of crisis, which is true across all faiths. And it's certainly something we experienced on site. We interacted with Baptists and Catholics and all kinds of folks who were there doing their thing following the storm. But that was Ira's contribution. Reber talked about poverty and the origins of poverty and how it was centered in certain locations in New Orleans. And I did a little bit on the physics and the meteorology of the storm itself and how a city that is largely below sea level engineers itself to survive as best it can. But the experience of being there was fascinating. Our bus driver delivered us to the job site on the first day, watched the students work, and contracts with bus drivers, they had accommodations better than we did.
Right.
But he watched the students, and he took off on the bus and went to a store and bought a couple of cases of water because he couldn't imagine the students working this hard without him doing something. So he bought water for the students on the first day. On the second day, he went back to the store and he bought clothes. And then he started working with us. It would have gotten him fired if we told the bus company in those days what was going on. But he became part of the crew. And it was a very powerful experience for the students to interact with the homeowners, to sometimes be the first person to open the front door after 6 months of
muck and mold
mud and punch a train punch being in the house. Nobody can prepare you for the aroma of what is in a house. If you could imagine what it would be like for your house to be flooded for several months, baked under a hot sun, and you had to have left very quickly. What have you left behind that will take on a unique odor? You can only imagine, what a kitchen pantry might be like. So it was a powerful experience with the students. They then came back and built websites about their experience. It was a really transformational thing, I think, for them. And I think for Ira and Reber and I as well.
Good. Well, thank you. That does sound powerful. Well, moving on to more mundane things, I guess. I'm not sure if mundane is the right word, but you were associate dean of the college for beginning in 1992. So after you've been here only about 10 years, and with Jerry Garris was dean, I believe.
That's
that
right.
time. And then you were also acting dean about 10 or 15 years later. Do you want to talk about your experiences and how that prepared you for?
So I mentioned that I was a department chair very early on and had already done that for a few years prior to tenure. And when it came time to look for my first sabbatical leave, I thought about a couple of different things and applied for an ACE fellowship, which was an administrative, almost internship kind of position. And while I was going through that process, several administrative positions opened up within academic affairs. And I had become friends with Dean Garris, and we had a deal that I would come and try it out, just like I had an ACE fellowship, and see if I liked administration, and work for him as an associate dean. And at the end of the year, either of us could walk away, no questions asked. And then I stayed and worked for him for 9 years, and he was truly a mentor in a lot of ways.
Good. And do you, so you did that for 9 years, and then you were an acting dean, like
Yeah, I
after
went
the
back to the
Katrina episode.
Yeah,
it
I
looks
went
like.
back to the faculty
Yeah.
after President Payne left.
Yeah.
Spent some time as a more senior member of the physics faculty. When President Lindgren came and Dean Holyer left, there was a need for an interim person while a search happened. So I filled in for a year there while the search took place.
So that was good. You'd had that experience.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah,
the college
it was
needed
helpful.
You. Yeah. So during your time, I'll just say for the record that you were appointed provost of the college in 2009. So during that time, the last 10 years have been a lot of change and growth at the college and across all areas.
Yes.
So why don't we talk about that?
Sure.
A little bit. Why don't we start with the students and student body changes and seen in 10 years or time as provost?
So I guess the first most noticeable thing about students is there's more of them.
Yeah.
And I think what I've noticed over the years is the engagement of our students. Our current students are really busy people. They're athletes, they're part of the Greek system, they're in SGA, they're in theater, they're in choir, they're in chaplain's office, they're in Habitat, they're doing all kinds of things. And this is not a place for wallflowers. And it has really, I think, become more vibrant. I think we're an energetic place for a place our size. And I think that's one of the changes I've seen in students.
Good. I can feel that too in the time I've been here. Well, as Chief Academic Officer, we can talk about some of the changes and growth and development of the faculty, and I'll just let you go with that.
Sure. Well, again, there's numbers. We have quite a few more full-time faculty members than we did when I started. I think one of the highlights of what I get to do is to interview prospective faculty members. It's great fun to sit with someone who's incredibly bright, who is enthusiastic, and is telling you excitedly about the work that they do and work that they hope to do. And I guess as a lover of the liberal arts that I am, I get to learn something from each of them, no matter what the discipline is that we happen to be interviewing in. So it's a great joy to interview candidates. As I say, one of the highlights of what I get to do. But beyond just numbers of faculty, we've added a lot of programs. And it has been really fun to think about what we can do to help the liberal arts evolve, to help our programs evolve into things that will meet student needs, meet the demands of what students want when they come here, and help them to have productive lives after graduation. We've added, I think it's 11 new majors.
That's a lot, yeah.
And co-curricular programs in athletics, in student activities. And that's certainly contributed to the growth. The strategic plan we've had in place has been working. We've had that growth, and I, in addition to numbers, think it's added to the energy. We've got more things going on.
Well, speaking of programs and growth, we are about to embark on a very significant change for the college, historic change, really. So would you like to talk about the recent, well, 2 new programs? We're adding a nursing program beginning this fall, and the addition of the physician's assistant program.
Yeah. So Nursing is a natural thing for us. It certainly meets a community need. Randolph-Macon for 200 years almost has tried to serve its community in meeting needs, whether it was for Methodist clergy or for nurses.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the fact that we're doing that. We have had longstanding strengths in health professions, so this is a natural for us. And there is a need in the area for nurses. There's a need nationally for nurses. And I, as a person who's advancing in age and know that I will be in greater need of health care, I'd be really pleased to go to a nurse that had a Randolph-Macon education.
Good.
I would feel like I was in good hands.
Yeah.
Because nurses who can think in ways that we teach people to think, I think are going to be in high demand and are going to serve the profession well. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited that program's getting started. Physician assistant is another interesting one. It's a return to something that we used to be. I mean, we used to give graduate degrees back in the 19th century. Mm-hmm. I don't think very many people remembered that. They hadn't kept up with their reading of Professor Scanlon's histories, and known that we used to give out graduate degrees. So I think it was startling to some folks that this historically undergraduate institution would ever issue a graduate degree. When they learned that it happened in the past, they were shocked. Mm-hmm. But it's, again, a natural outgrowth. This is an emerging area of service. Mm-hmm. Physician assistants come at the healthcare profession very much as service people. Again, that fits our mission so well. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we're satisfying a need for society in a way that we can do so. And it will continue to add energy, it will continue to add prestige to our institution. And I'm excited about what it's going to bring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of changes, but I think it's a lot of compelling reasons to move forward with that.
Yes, absolutely.
Which you've touched on. Well, speaking of service, you have done quite a bit of service for the college besides your roles as faculty and administrator. So I wanted to give you a chance to talk about some of the ways that you've, some committees you've been on. I know you were on the Presidential Search Committee and other really significant ways you've served the college.
Yes, I was on the search committee that brought President Lindgren. It was a great experience. It was an opportunity for those of us who were faculty to interact with trustees in a way that I think forged some good relationships between trustees and faculty. I think those of us who were a part of the process really realized that both groups passionately wanted the institution to succeed, and you really see that when you work on a project together. Mm-hmm. So that was great. Prior to being associate dean, I had been chair of the curriculum committee for a number of years, and that was the expertise I was bringing to the dean's office in those days, was working on curriculum development. And indeed, as associate dean, that's when we brought our first interdisciplinary majors: environmental studies, women's studies, international studies. All came about during that time period. So that taught me. I think it also taught the institution what we could do in that regard. I was on the committee on the faculty and chaired that in the time between being associate dean and being provost. And certainly as department chair had worked through faculty development, faculty evaluation, things like that. So I guess I'd seen a lot of the different aspects of the college by the time I landed in the provost chair.
Which is great, that you had all those different pieces to come together, and you had a big toolbox to use. Yeah, great. Well, I do want to have a chance to talk about, on a personal note, a few things that people mentioned to me. Can you tell us about your Friday evening family nights in Crenshaw Gym?
Oh gosh, that was really an enjoyable time. back when I was younger and more nimble. And so were the rest of us who were a part of that group. I don't remember who started it, but there were several families, including my own. The Shays, Russ Shay was a good friend. The Garrises, which is, I mentioned earlier, Jerry had become a friend. Mike Wessels, the Raboons, the Spagnas, the Lamberts, and I'm missing a few, I'm sure.
Ungers, maybe.
Ungers, absolutely. Porters. Kids came along. Kids hung out in one area. Parents played volleyball or basketball or whatever they wanted to do. And at the end of it, everyone adjourned over to Anthony's across the road to undo whatever good we might have done by getting the physical exercise. But it really was a nice community builder. Everybody's kids were everybody else's kids, so one person would kind of drop out of games for a while and make sure the kids were safe and not getting into any trouble, and everybody's children obeyed everybody else's parents. So that worked well, and the kids grew up knowing one another, and they formed some lifelong friendships. When my daughter got married a couple of years ago, Ellie Shea was her maid of honor. She's known Ellie since Ellie was born. And they played in the gym together, and
That's great.
So it was a multi-generational friendship.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful description of community. That's great. You outside of Randolph-Macon, I believe, had some experience as a soccer referee.
That's
and
right.
A special license plate.
Yes. I don't know how I got hooked into that either, but I started refereeing soccer when I was in my 40s and wound up doing almost 2,000 games until I got too old and too slow to chase teenagers anymore around a field. And there's a lot of running involved in it, and being able to keep up is something you owe the players. Mostly I did high school games. It was a fun way to be in a game. As an academic, when you mess up, people save that and they raise it months and weeks down the road. If you're an official in a game and you mess up, you hear about it right away. So it's a very different kind of experience. But it was an enjoyable experience. It was a way to stay in the game, to work with young people, to experience the thrill of sport from a different perspective. Very much enjoyed it. 60 plus years ago, my family had no idea when they named me that they were giving me a set of initials that would come to mean something else later on. And I'll leave it to those who will listen to this to figure that out, because you already gave my name at the beginning. But my kids thought it would be great fun to buy me a license plate that had my initials followed by the REF on it. And they did that for Christmas one year and put it on my truck, and I would drive around with that license plate until the DMV decided that it wasn't something that ought to be in Virginia, and asked for it back. So, but it was fun while it lasted.
Oh, very good. Well, I want to ask you one other thing. I heard at a previous retirement event, and I can't remember who the staff member was, but a story of you visiting someone in the hospital, and you dressed up like Santa. I think it might have been Joyce in the library.
Joyce Fields. Yes.
I think it may have been Joyce Fields when she retired.
Yeah, Joyce. Joyce was a special person. Joyce was our assistant in the dean's office when I was associate dean.
Oh.
Joyce had some health issues, and did go visit Joyce and get to know her husband as well as her, and she moved into the business office after she had been ill, and worked there for many years. But yeah, great person.
Well, so she must have been in the library prior to that. I know she worked in the library, but I think that might have been.
That may have been
I think
before her time. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think that was when Flavia was here, and Flavia was retiring about early 80s. Was Flavia had retired by the time you came?
Flavia was here a couple of years when I came. In fact, I think she was chair of the committee on the faculty when I first came.
Now, I'm speaking about Flavia Owen, who was previous
Yes.
library director.
Yeah.
And she was library director for over 40 years, but she retired. Well, she retired from being library director, and then she was director emeritus and still on campus for a couple of years
Yeah.
while they were, the new Dan
Dan
Bedsole
Bedsole came. Dan came from Austin College. We've had an interesting relationship with Austin College. We've exchanged a lot of people over the
interesting.
years. Dan came from there. Ned Moore, who previously worked in our advancement office, came from there. And we have recently sent them. Beth Gill is now their chief academic officer. She was a longtime member of our sociology department. So we've exchanged a lot of personnel with Austin College over the
Interesting.
years.
That's unusual.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
unpredictable. Very good. Well, I want to just note for the record that you and your wife Patty were among the first donors to the college's now new science building. When you came, you had a new science building, and now we
Yes.
have Brock Hall, and you gave a generous gift to that, along with other faculty members as well. I also want to note that you won the Thomas Branch Award for Excellence in Teaching in 1985 and in 1990. And the Samuel Nelson Gray Distinguished Professor Award in 2000. And I want to congratulate you on your recent induction as an honorary member of Randolph-Macon's chapter of Phi Beta Kappa.
Thank you.
So, when you look back on your time at Randolph-Macon, what do you see as the watershed events of the college over 30 years?
Oh, the watershed events. The very room in which we're sitting right now didn't exist. One of the first new things that happened when I was here was the change in the library. Changing the direction it faced. Used to face the street, now faces the academic quadrangle. And indeed, the day that I was tenured at the college was the dedication of the new library, and Tom Wolfe spoke.
Oh, right.
At that occasion, and my in-laws were here. They were very impressed that they got to see Tom Wolfe. Thought we did that kind of thing all the time, and no, this was a really special event. So that's certainly one watershed moment. I think seeing the construction that has happened over the last decade, it's not one moment, but it's an era that we'll look back on as changing from having been a fairly tired-looking place to being, I've used the word energy a lot, a more energetic-looking place, a more vibrant place. And, it'd be nice to have a construction crane on campus all the time, recognizing that we're doing things.
Seems like we do.
Yes, it does, doesn't it?
So, yes, I mean...
And then I'll go back to starting environmental studies as a watershed time, because I think it taught us that we could think outside the box curricularly, and we could cross disciplinary bounds and create new programs. And having done lots of them since then, it follows, but somebody has to go first. And getting that together first, I think, was critically important. Bruce Unger was a big part of that. Brian Moores was a big part of that. We dreamed a good dream and we made it happen. And I look at that as a really important time that we did something.
Well, dreaming a dream and making it happen, that sounds very satisfying.
It is. It is.
Well, so as you think back over any other memories or reflections, I mean, that sounds very positive, but anything else you would like to share, stories?
Individual students who have gone on to great success. I don't want to slight anyone by not telling their story, so I'll use only one. Kate Roof was a student who was highly regarded in our department. We loved her to death. She was a perfect Randolph-Macon student, a physics major who was also a very talented choir member, has a spectacular voice. Went off and did a PhD at Notre Dame, very rapidly moved through positions to become a chief financial officer in the South Bend school system, and has now come back to Randolph-Macon and works in the president's office, helping us implement our strategic initiatives, using her problem-solving skills. I'll go all the way back to where we started, Lynda, and talk about liking to solve problems with numbers. She's certainly that kind of person that can bring the science training, the numbers training, coupled with the creativity and the breadth of intellectual thought that we inculcate here, and bringing it into solving some of our most interesting problems and creating new programs for the future.
Wonderful. That's a wonderful example, and a great way to sort of tie the interview together by a Randolph-Macon student who has done really well in coming back to serve the whole theme of service again. Well, I understand that you are going to take a well-deserved sabbatical next year.
That's correct.
And do you have any plans, specifically what you plan to do on the sabbatical and beyond?
I have 2 writing projects in mind. One is I have a long-standing research interest in the physics of sports. It has tied together. You mentioned my work as a soccer official. One of the things that is not well studied is the science of officiating. If you watch a sporting event these days, there's all kinds of statistics and analytics about the performance of the players. Very little on the performance of the officials and what they can and can't do. So I've done some things with that, and have an article that I've been working on in that area. And then I also have a reflection piece that's itching to get out about administration. And it's not a tell-all, so nobody needs to panic. But my sort of working title is Everything I Know as an Administrator I Learned by Being a Soccer Referee.
Oh, that's
And
great.
there are lots of skills that you learn in mediating people who are well-intentioned and overly energetic on a field that apply very well to work in an academic environment. As I mentioned earlier, you get yelled at a different pace, but there's a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of skills that are transferable, and some of that's itching to get out of my head and get onto paper. So we'll see how that turns out.
Well, that sounds like that'll be very satisfying as well.
Yep.
Well, Bill Franz, I want to thank you so much for coming and sharing your memories of your time
Thank
at
you.
Randolph-Macon with Macon Memories.
This has been a great project, and I thank you for doing it. It's a great contributor to the college, and I thank you for your contributions.
Thank you.